John Natoli. I am John Natoli, and I have kind of been coming to this building for many years, living around the corner of the building for many years. And I first became a member of King's Chapel when I was a young man. In fact, I think Jimmy Carter was president, so that puts it in perspective for me. Anyway, glad to have you all here tonight. It's we all know what a good cause conservation law foundation is. But before I start, I want to tell you a little bit about logistics for tonight. We have more than one speaker. So I think what we should do is if you could hold questions until the end of someone's presentation, and then you can just raise your hand and the speaker can call you. We can just agree to relay messages from people who attended virtually tonight, and we'll direct those questions to the speaker. I next want to thank King's Chapel and Joy Fallon for making available to us this really a great spot. I don't know, I think a lot of you know this, but King's Chapel is a big force in Boston for many years, and actually King's Chapel is sort of a primary mover in spiritual needs for people in Boston really since before the American Revolution. Luckily, I've talked to Joy, and she's agreed to start off by saying a few words tonight about King's Chapel, what it's doing today, to give you some perspective on King's Chapel. Joy?
I didn't know really that was my assignment. I thought what I was going to start out with a spiritual note. Did I just turn this off? Can you all hear me? Okay, good. So I've been here at King's Chapel for almost 10 years now. So joyful. There are many of you who are here who are part of the church, others of you who are not, and that's of course wonderful, because our whole goal is to be out in the community. When I start a service, I say, whoever you are and wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. Believer or doubter, seeker or skeptic, we're all on this journey together. And we mean that for whatever your faith tradition is or no faith tradition. We want to be a community that supports everybody, and we're just glad you're very much here. I wanted to share just a vignette about something that occurred today. Our church has been doing a lot of research into our past engagement with slavery. And we've been doing that because, as you know, as people here in New England have been discovering more how all of us in this area were, who were here during the colonial time, many of us had complicity with slavery. And so I participated in a meeting today at Harvard Divinity School, where they were starting to explore this as a result of the report that Harvard made. One of the things that they talked about was the research that was done by Professor Agassi, who is a very well-regarded professor at the time, and he wanted to distinguish between the different races. And he suggested that there were 5 different species of humans, not just races, but species of humans. So instead of one Adam and Eve, as the story would say, that's of course wonderful myth to explain something, but one Adam and Eve, he would say there were 5. And as soon as you differentiate that way and set up a hierarchy, it separates us. Well, another separation that historically has happened has been about us as individuals and humankind and the world and the earth. And one of the things that we've been talking about is the wonderful sacredness of all of creation, and that our obligation is not just as humans to one another, but to this world. So any of those separations, however they happen, often just cause us pain and division. We really are all on this journey together, and we're so glad for the work that you're doing. We're so glad for the work that the whole community is doing, and grateful to the Environmental Committee headed up by Kent, which is now one of our most active groups in the church. John, who's just joined our board, has done a great job bringing everyone here together, and I want you to hear more from them. But really, welcome. We believe in the seamlessness of all of us and the importance of all of us here nurturing the world.
Thank you, Joy. I learned a few things by listening to that. Very good. Thank you. I'd also like to thank a few other people tonight. I want to thank Pam Heslam for the wonderful hors d'oeuvres you'll see, and also Michelle Godet, who has arranged for all our audio visual needs. And you can see they're quite sophisticated. I also want to point out a few other things. We have a couple of actually representatives from CLF here tonight. We have Sharon Malt, who's on the Board of Trustees. Yep, Sharon Malt. You can. We have John Aubrey, who is president of the Mass Board, and we have Jean Clapp, who is was until recently was the treasurer of CLF, and Jean goes way back in environmental things. So it's great to have everybody here, have them here. Now, the next person I would like to introduce to you is one of our own at King's Chapel, Kent Wittenberg. Ken has been a member for a number of years, and for the last few years, he's been a driving force in something called the King's Chapel Environmental Initiative, which in the past several years has done a lot of amazing and creative things in the environmental area. So, Kent, why don't you come up?
Thank you very much. I'll keep it short. It's but the first thing I want to say, it's not just me. We have a committee of 5, and they're either here in person or there. So thank you to all my fellow committee members. Cynthia's nodding. She's one. Julie Hyde and Dory. And then we have Sylvia here. Yeah, and Cynthia, Sylvia. And anyway, so we've had a great run. And if any of you haven't discovered it yet, we have a web page on the church website where we post information, but we also post recordings of the speaker series. So we have these events once a month, and we really had some nice speakers, and we hope to post this one as well. So check it out if you can, and thank you very much for being here. And thank you, John, for taking all the trouble to put this together, and then we put our name on it.
Thank you, Ken. One person I also wanted to thank was Gretchen Horton, who was kind of the driving force in Major Domo for putting this together. Couldn't have happened without Gretchen's diligence and perseverance. So thank you, Gretchen. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Kate Saunders, who's the Director of Development at CLF. She's been in the job for, hi, good. 10 years, that's right. And since Kate has been the Director of Development, the whole area has really taken off. And year over year, she keeps raising lots of money. In fact, even during the pandemic, she had year over year increases in revenue coming into Conservation Law Foundation. And as we all know, that's quite a feat. So congratulations on that. Before Kate was at the Conservation Law Foundation, she was at the Trustees of the Reservation, leadership position there, also with the Audubon Society and Children's Hospital. So she has quite a good record, and she obviously continues to show her ability to get things done at CLF. And now it's also my pleasure to introduce you to Brad Campbell, who's president of CLF. Brad is one of these people who's really been kind of a leader in the environmental movement in the U.S. for really the past 40 years. I know that's hard to believe that he could be a leader for 40 years. He's remarkably young looking for that. But anyway, before that, Brad had a number of leadership positions. He was regional administrator for the EPA for the Mid-Atlantic region. He was also the, I think, commissioner of the New Jersey Department of the Environment. Then after that, Brad had his own company, his own firm, where he actually did a lot of work trying to protect lower income people from, having poor water quality. And he also took on a lot of the big polluters like Exxon and Mobil and those companies, and kind of brought them to task in a way that I think is quite remarkable. With that, I introduce you to Brad Campbell, president of CLF.
Thank you, John, for that very kind introduction. And thank all of you for your engagement in these issues. It's enormously important, and I'm looking forward to learning more about the work of the committee. But engagement in this particularly perilous time for our environment and our democracy is so important. And the faith community has been a great partner in our work across the board. There are people with a different level of awareness of CLF in this room. You know, Sharon could probably give my remarks and I could just lip sync because she's familiar enough with our work. So I'll just give a little bit of an overview and then look forward to questions. Many of you may know CLF from the cleanup of Boston Harbor. It's sort of the foundational case that we brought many years ago, and it took decades to finish the work of cleaning up the harbor, which had been treated as an open sewer essentially for hundreds of years. And it might surprise you to know, I started CLF 7 years ago, and the final deliverables from that lawsuit didn't get completed until just after I started. So it gives you a sense of sort of the time scale of some of the work. Fast forward to today, that harbor is being put at risk by an ExxonMobil facility that is low-lying, climate vulnerable, and could, with a catastrophic spill, wipe out all of that investment that the public has made in cleaning up the harbor with a catastrophic spill. Not only that, day to day, because of climate change, because of the more intense rains we have, there are more pollutants, daily violations of their Clean Water Act permit at that site. And so like ExxonMobil it now has a lawsuit pending against it by CLF. And it really, in some sense, captures the difference between that time when CLF brought that first lawsuit against every level of government opposed us in terms of cleaning up the harbor, to today, where we have, in some sense, many of the same challenges, but in a very different intensity and importance. As you know, climate change is here. It's already affecting our world. Here in New England, we're especially vulnerable. We're already seeing more intense rains, more extreme weather. We're a coastal state, so we're especially exposed. Gulf of Maine is one of the fastest warming bodies of water in the world. And of course, added to those challenges, we have a government that, in terms of climate action, is largely at impasse or dysfunction. Notwithstanding the recent Biden bill, there is still so much work to do, and we are so far behind in terms of averting the very worst of climate change. We also know from a social justice perspective that those burdens of climate risk don't fall evenly. Low-income communities, communities of color, they're hit first and worst by climate risk. That's as true here as it is in New Hampshire and every other state in CLS footprint, which is all of New England. We have offices in every state. And in terms of the natural resources that are so iconic to New England, so much a part of our identity, whether it's our cod fishery or North Atlantic right whales, one of the most critically endangered species on the planet, we have we are seeing immediate impacts in terms of the warming of the waters, the shifting of migration patterns, and the loss of species. So in this moment of particular peril, we have work to do. The important thing to remember is that we're also in one of the great laboratories of innovation here. And I think that's true on the environment as it is in the tech industry, and going back all the way to the revolution in terms of New England's role as a leader. And our role in that as CLF is really one of accountability and forcing action on the most urgent issues. We now have, after much work, we have strong climate laws in 5 out of 6 New England states. The outlier is New Hampshire, which probably doesn't surprise anybody in this room. But those laws don't implement themselves, and the political will to implement those laws is often lacking. In fact, here in Massachusetts, we just had a climate law longer than any of the other states. The only major rules that have came about in response to a CLF lawsuit. Another new climate bill, you probably heard, was passed here over the summer, and we're expecting the same is going to be true there. So the ability to hold public officials accountable is a common thread in our work, extending back to the Boston Harbor lawsuit, but even more urgent now. Because the agencies that have to implement those laws actually have fewer people than they did back 20 years ago. But that's not the only challenge. The challenge is also that at the same time that we need to force climate action, make sure the rules are in place to reduce emissions and compel adaptation, we're also faced with the fossil fuel industry spending literally billions. Bloomberg put it at about $150 million a year to undermine climate science and weaken the political will of those who we really need to do the rules to move us forward on climate. And so, among other things, our role is to hold those companies accountable. It's one of the reasons we have actions pending against ExxonMobil, against Shell, for their low-lying facilities, climate vulnerable facilities, because their scientists doing very good science have known since the Nixon administration. It's nice to be in a room where probably most everyone here remembers the Nixon administration. I'm often speaking to groups that don't, but and yet at the facilities where they're in the communities that have hosted their facilities for years, they've done nothing to prepare their facilities. Witness the one I mentioned on Boston Harbor. There's a similar facility, low-lying, climate vulnerable in Rhode Island. There's a number of similar facilities, low-lying and vulnerable in New Haven. Shell, Gulf, ExxonMobil, where we have lawsuits against them all. And interestingly, ours are the only climate lawsuits against the oil companies that have actually gotten to discovery, where we can actually begin to get the documents to prove the case that their climate deceit is directly linked to real risk to communities. And the communities are, in this case, if the facility is in Chelsea, or sort of perched between, it's in Everett, but it's perched on the border with Chelsea. Again, communities whose health is already compromised by exposure to pollutants and other threats. You probably saw it during the pandemic. Chelsea was the hotspot for COVID-19. Why? Because compromised respiratory systems. Those are the same vulnerabilities that make them more susceptible to the kind of pollution they would see from an ExxonMobil facility, more susceptible to the increased heat that we're getting as a result of climate change. And of course, they have the least in the way of, as Mayor Wu just pointed out, the least in the way of tree canopy. And those are communities that we take particular focus to address, because they are hit first and worst, and they have historically not been adequately protected by our environmental laws, even though those laws are neutral on their face. Similarly, we have a lot of work to do to protect, as I said, those resources that are natural resources that are really part of our identity here in New England. Certainly, we have multiple cases pending to protect the North Atlantic right whale, about one of the most endangered species on the planet. We're actually working with the lobster industry on ways to take ropes out of the water so that the right whales do not get entangled in them. and we can save and hopefully cause this facility to rebound. And so we across the board, there is this thread of accountability, whether it's the National Marine Fisheries Service in the case of right whales, or the state government in the case of climate rules, or the largest, most powerful corporations in the world, like ExxonMobil. But there's also an element of hope and aspiration, because we have the technologies to make the energy transition. We have the knowledge and the ability and the tools to make that energy transition equitable, so that the costs are borne in a socially just manner. We have the ability to address the communities and protect the communities that are hit first and worst by climate change, and even to protect those species that are at risk. This is our challenge, but it's also a challenge we approach with the same energy, aspiration, and ambition that caused us to bring that lawsuit 50 years ago. The players are different, the challenges are different, but the basic DNA of the organization of being willing to take on, whether it's powerful governments, powerful corporations, and bringing about the change that we need, whether it's to protect climate, to protect communities that are most burdened by pollution, or to protect the resources that are really iconic to New England. That is our mission, and I look forward to your questions.
In what ways did you have to, I'm sorry,
I'm not sure people could hear you who are on Zoom. Is that right? Zoom people?
No, we were checking. The sound is fine, but
Okay.
maybe if you wouldn't mind repeating the question, Brad.
I'll repeat the question. Sure.
yeah, the question was, in what ways did you have to amend or step up your strategies during the Trump administration?
We had to spend more time fighting efforts to roll back. No, I'm sorry. Thank you. The question was, how did our approach change during the Trump administration? And we definitely had to spend more resources, more time, just to hold the line on the existing protections we have. Whereas ideally, we're mostly trying to advance better protection, improve administration and enforcement of the law. There, we had to actually hold the line on attempts to roll back those statutes. And that's, I have to say, a constant challenge. Trump presented his own special version of it, of course. But just to give you an example, one of the Trump rule changes cut back the ability of states and tribes to weigh in on the impacts of major fossil fuel projects under the Clean Water Act. The Biden administration, though it has repealed and replaced some of the Trump rollbacks, not all of them. And so you probably saw in the papers the recent so-called side agreement. There was the climate bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, and then there was Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia had this other deal he had with the administration, right? And so at the same time, we're getting some climate progress. We're also getting a significant rollback in environmental protections under this, supposed deal. And even as the deal failed, the president said he would sign it. That's a pretty clear signal, even though that bill failed, that the Biden administration is not going to be restoring any of the remaining protections that Trump rolled back, simply because they align so well with what Manchin was trying to achieve. So, we have those challenges. And the state, we do focus a lot on state remedies, state action. And we have had, as I said, we've had, in 5 out of 6 states we have climate laws, but they still have to be enforced. And we've had major challenges on that front. Our lawsuit to compel the first round of rules started during the Patrick administration. And CLF was really the only group willing to take the Patrick administration on. No one wanted to alienate an otherwise or perceived friendly on the environment administration. So that's often the role we play, whether it's in terms of getting the government to do its job, whether it's in terms of protecting public access to the waterfront against excessive or ill-planned development, or whether it's taking on major polluters.
I believe you were involved in the access to the waterfront issues on the Boston Harbor. Are you involved at all with the Harvard Boathouse issue?
You know, oh, yes, I'm sorry. The question is whether we've been involved in the Harvard Boathouse issue, which you're right on point, because it is the same law we enforce in terms of the Boston waterfront. We have, you know, one of the important things to us is that we focus where we're adding value and we're not duplicating what other groups are doing. The Charles River Watershed Association is a great partner of ours. They're taking the lead on that. I suspect if it gets to litigation, they'll want our help. But for the moment, we're helping them only in the sense that one of our lawyers is now their general counsel. So we are helping them in a sense. But it's a great example of, you know, where the type of issue where we have to come in, and the fact that we actually very recently won a case vindicating the principles of public access, public rights to the waterfront, which are really as old as the Commonwealth, will give them a strong lever in terms of getting Harvard to do the right thing.
We have a question from the remote audience.
Oh, please.
The question from Joyce is, Mr. Campbell's message of hope is gratifying. However, how does CLF hope to hold government, large corporations responsible when so many voters and so many jurors seem to simply deny the science or deny the facts presented? Is there a strategy to change the average person's heart and mind about the important work of CLF? Well,
Oh, yes. Okay. I thought you were mic'd. Okay. The question is, what are we doing to change the hearts and minds of the general public? And you know, it's a great question, and we spend a lot of effort and resource on communications to try to elevate these issues. Of course, we're faced with a misinformation or disinformation campaign among the fossil fuel industry, so it's a challenge. Here in New England, we, for the most part, with 5 out of 6 states with strong climate laws, you know, it's not so much winning hearts and minds as it is ensuring the political will to act on those statutes. But I also mentioned New Hampshire, and there we have to have a different strategy. It's one of the it's one of the strengths of CLF that we tailor our strategies to whichever state we're in. We try to focus on work that's replicable. So the Massachusetts climate law became the model for the Vermont law we passed, the Maine law we passed, and so forth down the line. But New Hampshire, we have different strategies. They are more litigation focused and typically use more federal laws rather than state laws, because it's a totally different political environment. So some examples of that, we're working with some towns cities and towns that actually want to bring their own lawsuits against the oil majors. We are in court as we speak, today being the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. We are in court in New Hampshire to finally shut down the last two coal-fired power plants that are in New England. We've shuttered them up and down the state. We've also succeeded in stopping new natural gas plants, new fossil fuel infrastructure. One of our lawsuits essentially shut down the effort to finance new natural gas pipelines on the back of ratepayers. So we're in that, we've had enormous success, and I think each of those successes plays its own role in bringing people to the issue and elevating the issue for them. It's, there's a lot of, a lot of people still think of natural gas as a sort of a clean fuel. But as people learn more, and especially as they learn more about the various ways in which the elected officials have created a framework that actually subsidizes that fuel, I think the more they come to the issue. I also think there's increasingly a recognition that this is where the economy is going. This is where the opportunity is going to be, and where simply as a matter of the economy as well as the environment, the place where we have to work together to sort of make that energy transition happen. Yeah.
So you talked about CLF's role as an advocacy organization and also CLF's role as an action organization. Right? How would you describe the road that CLF is on for the next 25 years? What kind of organization are we going to become?
Well, I think that there are, I think it's going to be a slightly larger organization. I think this is an especially important moment. We really have to step up our effort to meet this moment. And just to sort of, look at the range of issues we do, in climate, lots of progress that's now, and lots of persuasion that's now a little bit at risk because of the Ukraine war and the way it's roiled energy markets, the prominence of gas prices and so forth. So that's a major challenge, and the fossil fuel industry has not wasted a minute amping up their disinformation campaigns to capitalize on that moment. We're faced with increasing disinformation campaigns that are more local. It's increasingly turning out, there's increasing body of evidence that utilities too have been in this game of deceiving the public about how realistic their climate plans are, for example. So we need more attention to holding them accountable for the fact that we have these emission reduction mandates in place, but they don't really have any realistic business plan to address the transition. We have, in terms of impacts on communities, we're already seeing that. So we need really to provide more resources to those communities that are most exposed as they begin to feel those impacts. And we really have to invest in accelerating the deployment of climate solutions. And that is probably one of the harder challenges. New England could be the Saudi Arabia of wind. And yet, and we played a large role, as you know, in getting steel in the water and an offshore wind project done in Rhode Island. The second, that was a fairly small project, but the larger projects are still waiting in a sense. And well, one of our challenges, for example, in that front is the Koch brothers are funding litigation to stop one of the first wind projects. And what are they relying on? They're relying on the National Environmental Policy Act, the Endangered Species Act. Even though we've several years ago established an agreement with the major wind developers on the protocols they need to follow to protect North Atlantic right whales. So we have actually this misuse of, in my view, of the environmental laws to stop the thing we need to protect our climate. So those challenges are really increasing. We've gone sort of over the we went from one strong climate law in New England to 5 in the space of the pandemic. And so we're now, whereas we were focused on implementing one law in one or two states, we're now in those implementation processes across 5 states. So the work of that part of our climate work has essentially quintupled over the course of pandemic. Our staff has not quintupled, but we do have to begin to meet that challenge, because they're the only way that will move forward at the pace we need it to move forward is if there is some accountability. And often it doesn't mean we always bring litigation. Often it's the capacity to bring those lawsuits that gives us the leverage to ensure that things move along. But there is a great deal to do. I gave you a couple of examples of climate vulnerable facilities. There are many, many more, literally hundreds more across New England. Yeah.
So you mentioned that CLF spends a lot of time working with frontline communities. Can you talk a little bit about that work and how it has shifted or changed in the last few years in terms of how you work or partner with communities around some of these issues?
Yeah, the question was about how our work with communities has changed over the past several years. And I've roughly, I guess 3 years ago, we had a strategic planning process in which we had a major shift, recognizing that the communities hit first and worst by pollution, hit first and worst by climate, and that suffer the greatest in terms of their health impacts, that we needed to shift to more directly partner with those communities and to really understand their priorities and integrate those priorities into our work. Though here in Boston, we have some great community partners who, Chelsea Greenroots, who's working with us on the ExxonMobil lawsuit, Alternatives for Community Environment, that is very a close working partner in our transit justice work. And that's a shift. We've had, as an organization, we've had tremendous achievements in transportation. But one of our top items now is working with those groups is for a low-income fare across the board, so that even as we try to improve transit, we're also trying to make it more equitable. I think that shift has occurred across the board. We work much more closely than we did 5 years ago with community organizers. In fact, we're now a fiscal sponsor to a small group of community organizers because in some parts of New England, there isn't any infrastructure within communities. They may be organized around health or other issues, but they're not specifically focused on environment. They don't have that infrastructure, and we're actually creating it in communities like Manchester, New Hampshire, and Nashua, New Hampshire. So kind of a different tailored strategy in each state, but the idea is to empower those communities, those organizations with the tools they need, and they vary. It's not just litigation. One of our initiatives in the last several years has been to actually, one of the things we saw was that our great advocacy on transit meant that there was a lot more displacement and gentrification in the communities that were getting better transit, the Green Line extension, some of the improvements to the Fairmount line, and so forth. And looking at some of the challenges of redevelopment in formerly red line communities, we created an impact investment fund through a health and environmental scorecard, looking at the social and environmental determinants of health, actually steers redevelopment funding to projects that meet criteria for environment and health. Is it walkable? Are there green grocers nearby? And we produced nearly 600 units of housing in transit-oriented places through that program. So we've kind of linked our advocacy on transportation and climate to the very closely related issues of housing and health. And so sometimes litigation isn't the right tool. And so we're constantly looking at ways to innovate and to identify different tools that are more effective in moving the ball forward. Yeah.
In my former life, I was an attorney. And I've just gone through your staff directory. And it looks like you might have maybe on staff about 20 attorneys. I mean, there are people who hold other roles, but how many do you have on your staff?
I think it's about 40 right now.
So 40 divided by how many states? 5, 6?
By 6 states.
Yeah. And then I'm thinking about large law firms. I'm thinking about the legal, support that the state has, the Attorney General's office and others. And
They're easy.
I think really the question about growth, I think sounds critical at this stage in this time to get that kind of support. You're very nice to say that you don't always use lawyers, but as you said, the threat of being able to bring a suit as well as negotiation sounds critical. So I do sound small for all of you.
We do need to grow. I might be a little off on the lawyer figure. We definitely need to grow because the challenges are multiplying. So I very much appreciate that remark. I would point out that in addition to hiring lawyers and staff, and this really started when I came to CLF, we more and more are partnering with private law firms to bring this to augment our resources, but also we want to unleash them. We want to teach them, look, these are cases, you can bring them, and at least for certain cases where they can recover fees, they have an economic incentive to bring those cases. So, replication of the work, it's not just what we do, it's what we try to train others to do. That's really important. We are going to grow, and it's going to be a significant challenge. I do want to clarify something. I mean, John made it sound like the money just rolls in and rolls in and rolls in. But if there's one thing that we share with the faith community, it's that we have to pass the collection plate. And so so it's a constant effort to expand that and to be able to support the staff. But we have wonderfully supportive members in New England. I think we're at a moment in our history where people actually are gravitating to this set of issues, recognizing that they're not going to be able to have their grandchildren have what they had in terms of a livable planet, livable climate, and the kinds of experiences that we're privileged to have as New Englanders. Yeah.
Are there other regional organizations like yours throughout the country? And do you interact with them? If at all?
Not.
Repeat the question.
Oh, yeah. The question is whether there are other organizations like ours in other parts of the country. None as good, of course, but there are actually partner organizations. Interestingly, there's a group called the Southern Environmental Law Center. They were actually birthed by CLF. I think one of my long-serving predecessors, Doug Foy, who many of you know, was, I think it was his college roommate or law school roommate who actually started that organization. There's another one that covers the Midwest called the Environmental Law and Policy Center. They actually, Doug Foy was on their founding board because the funders said, well, we'll fund them, but only if CLF is part of it. So, and we partner with them regularly, and that's part of our, we not only try to replicate work within and among the states of New England, but we also try to translate our lessons to them. And likewise, we do learn from them. And increasingly, that's we increasingly look at opportunities to partner with them on things we might do jointly. So there are also other parts of the country that really don't have a similar organization. The Mid-Atlantic, as John mentioned, I was in the Mid-Atlantic for quite a while, has nothing comparable to CLF. Everything is state by state, and even within states, there isn't much collaboration. So it's really a great model, and fortunately, we do have counterparts that we're able to collaborate with.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the power of these organizations getting together and putting a full court press.
No, we do get together and we do share strategies and sometimes resources as well. There's, each region also has its distinct attributes. Among us, I'm the only one privileged to have a region where we have 5 out of 6 states with strong climate laws. This is the only region where we've really been able to achieve or are on the cusp of achieving a coal-free energy system and the ability to stop some of this major gas infrastructure. So there are differences, and it's even tougher in the Southeast, where they have a lot more coal still and a lot more impacts from coal. But we are collectively a great force.
Brad,
Barbara.
can you say a little bit more about the waterfront work you're doing? I was in Chicago this weekend, and granted, Chicago is a city that has a lot of problems. But one of the great things about Chicago is looking at their waterfront and seeing how it's filled with parks and nonprofits and water and access, and the buildings go from the other side of Lakeview, Lakeshore Drive, and they tear up into the city, and it's spectacular looking.
It is spectacular looking. I went to law school there, and so had the chance to appreciate it. And actually, just coincidentally, the architecture critic for the Chicago Tribune, Blair Kamen, has a new book out, and I'm trying to get him to come speak to us because he talks a lot about, I think the name of the book is Whose City Is It? And he does talk a lot about that exact issue. Here, it is really a matter of enforcing the law. And for years, for decades, really, the city, and I'll spare the current mayor because this is not her vision. But development was essentially a series of spot zoning deals with friends of the mayor. Maybe a slight exaggeration, but it's pretty evident. There are places on our waterfront where it's tiered, and other places where someone had a little more influence. And so in our most recent case, even though the height limits had exactly that tiered approach, and this is in the downtown municipal harbor plan right by the aquarium, the proposal was for a 600-foot tower right on the waterfront. And the rationale the state gave for allowing them that super variance, I don't even know if you can call it a variance. They said, well, Boston's changed a lot since the days when it was had warehouses on the waterfront. And so, we have, the reference is really the skyline. It's like, No, the whole point was that it wouldn't look like downtown. That's why there are rules, but and why we went to court to stop it. But it is a constant challenge because it has become an entrenched practice, even though CLF has been on the job for a long time. Even where we've won, we find that public access points that we helped create are privatized in either formal ways by actually putting fences in and saying no trespassing, or informal ways. You know, I'll walk to a place that I know is public access, and you know, some burly security guard will come by and say, you know, what are you doing here? I have a right to be here. So there's much to be done, and that's another area where you know, we have great hopes that this mayor is going to approach these issues differently. We have very few opportunities left to try to create the kind of public spaces you see in Chicago. We have some. We've helped in terms of creating some of the Piers Parks and things that are going on in East Boston. We'd like to see more of that in Boston, and we think there are those opportunities, but people have to change their thinking. And you know, for too long, and partly because of that history of the Harbor being an open sewer and parking lots and so forth in the waterfront, mayors were so happy just to get anyone interested in development that they didn't realize the gem that we had. They essentially traded away one of the city's greatest assets. And so we want to make sure they're not trading any more away and shortchanging the public in the process. Yeah.
Do you think Mayor Wu's replacement of the Boston Planning and Development Authority will be a positive?
It hasn't fully taken shape yet. The question is whether the Mayor Wu's replacement of the Boston Planning and Development Agency will be a positive. We're very hopeful. All of the moves so far have been very positive. In our challenge to the downtown municipal harbor plan, she was entirely supportive, even though our position says, part of our position was the cities didn't have the authority under the law to make the kind of trade-offs they did. She was supportive of both out of office and in office. There's often a difference between those two, but so we're very optimistic about that. But you know, the mayor doesn't necessarily control everything. There was a bill in the legislature just this last session. In fact, we're sort of monitoring it because it may come back, that would have carved much of the Everett and Chelsea waterfront out of the protections of the waterfront rules, out of the designated port area. So people in Charlestown would be looking over at Bob Kraft's soccer stadium, which is one of the proponents of it, which is, you know, the opposite of the kind of tiered, publicly accessible, publicly appealing kind of place that Barbara described. So we have the challenges do not stop. Yeah.
I loved your op-ed a couple of days ago on the Globe regarding the regional energy grid agency, ISO New England, and how it needed to change at the top. And so my question is, how can we make that happen? What is the strategy for actually changing some of those things?
The question is, the references to the there was a Globe op-ed about the operator of the New England electric grid. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to geek out about the energy system, because this is really something nobody knows much about. There's a sort of mysterious operator of the grid who's basically there by agreement among the New England states that yes, operate the grid. This is you know, we're ceding this role to you, and it's an important role. I mean, we don't want the lights to go out. We want, you know, they're very focused on reliability, but their notion of reliability has led us to a point where we are highly dependent on natural gas. And so what is their answer to improve reliability now? Well, let's increase natural gas infrastructure. So, which is the opposite of what we should be doing in terms of reliability, but let alone climate. And so we really need the states, and we're hoping the next governor will be more active in this to respond. And what they need to respond to is the grid operator, in addition to keeping the lights on, also operates the electricity markets. And that's important because whether a renewable project can get onto the grid is dependent on those rules. And they have designed those rules so that it's very difficult for renewables to get onto the grid. And those bad rules that effectively exclude renewables were just extended a couple of years ago. And it's really a remarkable thing, because when I first got here, the grid operator was saying, oh, we need a better policy to integrate, to reconcile all these states' policies on climate with the way we operate our markets. And they spent 5 years of public process, which we spent a lot of time in, and changed nothing. And came out, and this more recent rule actually made matters worse in terms of renewables. So we essentially need to have the states insist on change, and probably change in management. And if they don't, the states have options. They don't have to participate in that structure if they don't want to. And it's really an unfortunate. It's really unfortunate when you see five states out of 6 with clear policies, and there's essentially a counterforce of their own creation that's going in exactly the other way, and banging the drum regularly, saying we need more fossil fuels. So that's another source of our challenge. It's also something that's really opaque to the public. I mean, how many people in this room knew what New England ISO was, the independent system operator? No. Yeah, you know, you do.
I used to work for the National Grid before I decided I didn't want to work in the dark side.
Well, I think you need to think of some tenants. Exactly. Yeah.
Does Rhode Island's extensive coastline give them any special incentive to do what's right?
It certainly should, and they talk about it a lot. That we were very pleased that about a year ago we were able to get passed in Rhode Island their Act on Climate bill, a little behind the curve compared to Massachusetts, but still a good bill. And we actually, one of our victories was to make sure there were explicit provisions allowing us to enforce it in court, which the governor actually threatened to veto it over that until the Rhode Island Attorney General came in and said, no, this is a good thing. But on the other side, they are incredibly vulnerable. They actually had a commission established that was supposed to look at all their rules, figure out, well, what are the ones we need to change to address our coastal vulnerabilities and our overall vulnerability to climate. And that commission has scarcely met. They've been given no resources. They've done nothing. And I actually have an email that was sent to me saying, can CLF sue us from a member of that commission? Like, we want you to come sue us. Like, we're on this commission and we want you to sue us, because otherwise we're not going to be able to do the job that we've been charged by statute with doing. And it's phenomenal that happens, but not entirely unusual. John.
Brad, there are a number of municipal power plants in Massachusetts, municipal systems, and I assume they're all, burning fossil fuels. Has CLF had any conversations with those entities to try to get them to transition to clean energy?
We have, and they were strangely among the more, most of them were among the more recalcitrant in terms of entering that conversation, but we were able to get provisions in this most recent climate bill, might have been the one before, but that will start to bring them into the emissions caps system. So that's among the things that we're looking to do in this in the next round of rules. We're essentially going to, whoever the next governor is, we're going to lay on his or her doorstep right after the inauguration, a petition for a major rulemaking. Not a great welcome to a newly elected official, but as we've seen in the Biden administration, there's a honeymoon period when you can get things done, and if there isn't a fast start, we'll lose a lot of time. So and the municipal power and light facilities are a major piece of that.
Do you
Yeah.
take positions on certain technologies, whether it be geothermal, wind, solar, to encourage water over the other?
We tend to be technology neutral, although we look closely at both certainly safety in the case of nuclear, and although we need the nuclear plants we have that can be run safely, we've also been on the other side where when they're not being run safely and they're leaking radioactive materials into the environment. But otherwise, what we're really trying to do is set up the laws and the regulations so that the best technologies win, and then we can evaluate them on a case-by-case basis. We do often support funding for new technologies. We've spent some effort trying to support more funding for nuclear fusion, which one of the first proposed or was sort of a pilot plant has been started at the former Devens Air Force Base, Army base. And so, it's also kind of a homegrown technology. There are a lot of people working on it here. So funding, we tend to be have a lot of funding. We think that's actually a better bet than new nuclear power plants, nuclear fission plants, because just because of the level of public acceptance and the industry's inability to build a plant other than at a price tag 3 or 4 times what they originally promised to the rate-paying public. So some skepticism there. John.
Brad, to the extent we have the political will to try to remedy some of the climate injustices you talked about earlier, with all the bad stuff being not the good stuff being put on low-income communities. How long do you think it would realistically take to accomplish that, even if we had the political will? Because it's all entrenched, it's complicated. It seems like to me it'd be very hard to do, even if we tried to do it and have the will to do it.
It is entrenched. It is hard, but it's something both as a moral matter and a practical matter, I think we have to do. And change can be both slow and fast. Someone showed me recently in this context a picture of a street scene in New York. I won't get the dates right, but in one, there are horses and buggies, no, and 1 or 2 cars. The next picture taken 2 years later, it's all cars and 1 or 2 horses and buggies, horses or buggies. There's no reason why that can't happen with electrifying our cars, improving our grid. We have the technologies on the shelf, and the main obstacle really is political will and the power of the fossil fuel industry. And one reason we do focus on climate accountability in litigation as well as on the policy side is because there's no social problem involving major corporate power where litigation hasn't been important to create the political space for political system to move. Asbestos, lead, opioids most recently, tobacco, a major example. There's no regulation other than warnings. There were no regulations of tobacco, and only after major litigation took away the social license of those companies did FDA begin to regulate. And that's the kind of balance we have to strike in terms of really, push the rules, but also take away some of the power, some of the social license of those companies.
Thank you. One thing I want to say at this point is that we build this to go to 6:30, so by 6:30 we should wrap up. So I guess we have time for a couple more questions. If by 6:30 we better end.
I'll try not to filibuster. Gene.
I'm so glad to see Kate here. He wakes up every morning figuring out how to deal with underpinnings of all the good work, and so.
She wakes up every morning to do that. I stay up all night worrying about it.
It's a typical nonprofit, and so to the extent that there's a wonderful membership, there's a the website, which is a wealth of information. So the question is, how does a group like this become engaged or continue to be engaged with CLF after tonight, either through the state board or through some other mechanism or variety?
We have
Opportunity to.
okay. What Gene asks how people in this room and beyond can stay engaged. How do you sort of get enlisted in our work? And there are a variety of ways. Obviously, we depend on the generosity of our members to support us materially. But once you become a member, we also try to drag you in any way we can. You'll get action alerts. You'll get opportunities to engage in policy issues. We also have a senior fellows program for people who have professionals who have extra time. One way we augment our staff is we have a number of folks who are either retired or they're taking a time out from they've gone on a parenting track and are coming back in. And I think at any given time, we have about 24 lawyers, planners, scientists who are augmenting our staff that way. So there are many ways in terms of volunteering to get involved. And I'm sure you get lots of emails saying, call your senator, call your, call whomever. And it can be easy to underestimate the power that you have in making those calls. As a public official, I would have legislators come up to me and say, because I had adopted some really hard rule limiting development or strict water quality standard or something. They said, God, what are you doing? I'm getting killed on this issue. And the phone is ringing. Oh, well, this is the reason we did it. And like, how many calls have you gotten? 5 or 6. Really? The system can be responsive, and it isn't always, but there's a lot of power in your engagement with it, which is why it's so great to come to talk to a group like this tonight.
We also have a great speaker program.
Oh, yes, we have a
Yeah.
great speaker program. And
Thank Are these open to the public or speaker programs? Can people, the public attend? So you just.
Yeah, members get, and it's open to the public, but it's usually the members who actually receive the email and
It's
so
easy
forth.
to become a member.
It is easy to become, it is easy to become a member. So clf.org/donate is the place to go.
Easy to get on the board too, right, Tom?
But they're not.
So, Gene, I'll just add one more thing to their great comments is that a great way that everybody in this room can be involved is spread the word to your network. Each one of you has
Yeah.
a phenomenal professional, personal, spiritual network, but spread word, and just tell people about this organization. I mean, it's awareness is a huge part of it. And Brad and Sharon, made reference to the website. The website just gives us a glimpse into the incredible scientific gravitas that CLF, as you well know, that CLF represents. It's not just a bunch of lawyers. And the policy people, they're leaders in their field. So encourage you, go to the CLF website and read about this. You're going to read very unhypey information about these incredibly important things that are affecting our environment. So.
Yeah, I think there's, there is a malaise. There are people, especially people who've given up on politics or are cynical about politics. Like, how can we make a difference? And I will tell you, if everybody in this room recruited 10 people as members, that's a big deal for us. And it has a cascading effect, obviously. And we need that. Sure.
There's an exhaustion of the numbers of groups that are doing this work. There's yours, there's an environmental defense fund, there's the other fund. And they're not all alike exactly. Union of Concerned Scientists is a good one, but there are so many. And I wonder if we dilute our efforts. I mean, here we are struggling through, trying to figure out who's going to speak to us each month, ringing our bell and doing stuff. And I just do wonder, sometime if we might do better to coalesce or something. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think we do a pretty good job, not just CLF, but groups generally do a pretty good job of finding their lane. It may seem like they all do the same thing, but there are important differences. Like Union of Concerned Scientists, Environmental Defense Fund, we partner with them on any number of things. And they do important work. The UCS study on the climate vulnerability of oil and gas facilities actually has been important in our work. I'm actually speaking to a USCS audience soon, but they don't bring litigation. They can't file a lawsuit. Environmental Defense Fund, great organization. I've worked with them a lot. Very like Natural Resource Defense Council, very effective, but also very focused inside the Beltway. And none of them really have boots on the ground in New England. And increasingly, especially given the federal impasse, it's the action at the state, local, and regional level that we need to push the ball forward. It's also that work also is what makes action at the federal level possible. So Obama had a much touted clean power plan. It had to be implemented through the states. And so even if there is ultimately federal action, the things we are doing now here in New England will really provide the model and the infrastructure that we need when we finally, hopefully, can take action more nationally.
I have one last question for me. Everything you read in the media, you seem to be saying that the effects of climate change are coming here, experiencing them quicker than was originally prophesized by people. To what extent do you agree that that's the case? And if so, does it sort of mean that we're swimming against the tide and it's almost kind of hopeless in the long run to deal with stopping the heating of the planet?
Not hopeless. Every degree makes a difference. in terms of what, how habitable this planet will be in the future. And every degree makes a difference in terms of what the impacts will be in our communities, not to put too fine a point on it, but how many people will die from heat stroke or respiratory illness that's produced because the warming of the climate actually makes the air dirtier in addition to making it warmer. And that's important. We, I think, have an obligation to keep fighting. I'm hopeful. I get up every day optimistic that we can move the needle. And every increment that we can move the needle is just further encouragement. As I said, I didn't expect, I've sued ExxonMobil in every job I've ever had, actually. It turns out it's not a fetish or anything. It's just what you have to do, and they're one of the more difficult companies to deal with. But the former chairman of ExxonMobil was giving an interview, and they said, they asked him, were you worried about a carbon tax or government regulations? No, we're not really worried about that. And they asked him a series of questions about what they thought was a threat and regarding climate. And shareholders, no, that's not, we're not worried. We have that under control. And then they asked him about climate litigation. And he said, well, that keeps me up at night. And that's what we want to do. We want to keep the chairman of Exxon up at night as much as we can.
Well, I guess, thank you, Brad.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Again, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I think we got some very insightful and powerful comments about where we are, where we're going, and what we have to do. So with that, let's give Brad one more round of applause. And I also want everyone to know that you can always contact Brad and his people at the at the Conservation Law Foundation. I know he actually returns emails, so feel free to pick his brain a little more. Thank you.